History of American rifles from Civil War to modern times. There is no doubt the firearms have shaped the history of the United States. These tools of metal and wood are constantly argued about. In this video, we're going to look at the main rifles adopted by the US Army, so sidearms, marksman rifles and light machine guns will not be featured in this list. The United States Infantry Forces, or the ground forces of the US Army, have carried many different weapons throughout history. Here's a look at the weapons that the men and women who fought wars have carried throughout the years. The 1775 Brown Bess musket. Weight 10.5 pounds. Range 50 to 100 yards. Rounds per minute is 3 to 4 depending on the firer's skill. The Brown Bess was a musket, which means it was loaded from the muzzle and fired a .7 caliber lead ball. Long and heavy, it was a weapon for both mid-range and close quarters fighting. A triangle-shaped bayonet allowed for spearing the enemy, and the large size and heavy stock allowed men to use it as a club, stab and fight in hand-to-hand combat. The 1775 Charvel musket. Weight 10 pounds. Range effective roughly 50 to 75. Max was about 100 to 200 yards. Rounds per minute was 2 to 3 depending on the skill of the firer. The model 1775 Charvel musket, made in France, was a type of musket used by the Continental Army during the American Revolution. It is a .72 caliber flintlock designed in France. However, in an advance over the Brown Bess, Charvel was one of the few first weapons with barrel bands. The bands held the steel barrel to the wooden stock. Using bands allowed the weapon to be more easily assembled, and cleaned and maintained. The Charvel musket served as the pattern for the first muskets produced by US government arsenals in 1795. Model 1842 US percussion musket. Weight 10 pounds. Average range 50 to 75. Maximum range 100 to 200 yards. Rounds per minute 2 to 3 depending on the firer's skill. The Model 1842 was the first regulation musket produced in US arsenals using the percussion system. It fired a .69 caliber ball and instead of a flintlock used a small copper cap containing mercury fulminate to ignite the powder in the barrel. The Model 1855 US percussion rifle. Weight 9 pounds. Range effective up to roughly 500 yards. Maximum range was 1000 yards. Rounds per minute 2 to 3 dependent on firer's skill. A new type of shot would be used called the mini ball. Shaped more like a modern bullet, the .58 caliber mini ball was made of soft lead and was designed to expand slightly during firing, causing the lead to fill the rifled grooves in the barrel and spin, increasing the accuracy. Inventor Edward Maynard proposed a new system called the Maynard tape primer. The system worked much like a cap gun of the 20th century. The caps were fed from a magazine over a nipple, eliminating the need to carry a separate box of caps. However, even as the US adopted the Maynard system, the British were learning it did not work well in combat in the Crimean War. In the field, the system failed often, and though implemented in the Model 1855, it was removed in the following gun. Model 1861 US percussion rifle, musket. Weight 9 pounds. Range effective up to 400 yards. Maximum range 1000 yards. Rounds per minute 2 to 3 dependent on skill of firer. The Model 1861 was the standard musket used during the Civil War. The elimination of the Maynard percussion system was a major improvement and it fired the .58 caliber mini bullet. The Maynard tape system was scrapped as a failed experiment, but the M1861 was essentially the same weapon as the M1855. The Springfield Armory and partners produced over 1 million 1861s. The American Civil War was on, and the US Army needed the added weaponry to win the war. It was one of the first mass-produced weapons in US history. The larger caliber mini ball, paired with a triangular-shaped bayonet, contributed to highest body counts of any American conflict. These two weapons of war, combined with the lack of proper medical facilities, caused many Americans on both sides to die of disease or infection. The Model 1873 Springfield trapdoor rifle. Weight 9 pounds. Range effective up to about 400 yards. The maximum range was 1000 yards. Rounds per minute 10 plus dependent on the firer's skill. A thumb latch allowed the breech lock to open and pivot forward and a metallic cartridge was inserted and fired. Though still single shot and black powder, the rifle performed admirably for the most part. At first, to save money, the Army issued copper cartridges which expanded and were caught in the breech, making firing the rifle functionally useless. Unfortunately, the Army realised their mistake too late. Colonel Custer and his men were using the .45 to .70 Springfield during the Battle of Little Bighorn, and each copper cartridge caught in the barrel was devastating to their position. Eventually, Custer and his men lost the battle and were killed. After this disastrous loss, the Army ponied up for brass cartridges and added mandatory rifle practice of twice a week, a significant bump from the twice a month mandated previously. Krag Model 1892, weight 9 pounds, range effective up to 900 yards. Rounds per minute were 1 to 5, depending on the magazine. The Krag offered many advances over the old trapdoors, and was the first standard issue repeating rifle used by the US Army. Each weapon could accept 5 rounds into a small magazine and then fire these repeatedly. The firearm was used in quite a few conflicts at the end of the 19th century and was quite accurate. It had the new smokeless gunpowder. However, even with these updates, the Krag proved to be no match for the Spanish Mauser rifles during the Spanish-American War. At the time, the US Army was too late to adopt many new technologies, and while this may be the first standard issue repeating weapon, the technology had been around for a long time already. Springfield Model 1903, weight 8.7 pounds, range effective 656 yards, with a maximum range of 1200 yards. Rounds per minute, 15. Based upon the German Mauser, the 03 Springfield was a vast improvement over the Krag rifle, with a less complicated mechanism, a better magazine, and better 0.306 ammunition. The US Army might have been slow to adopt new technology, but around the turn of the last century the government began to retool weapons to copy better designs. The major advantage of the 1903 design was the stripper clips, which allowed the soldier to fire much more quickly, as well as the redesigned shell with a pointed bullet, still popular today. The 03 rifle saw service from 1905 through to the early stages of the Vietnam War. The M14 Garand, weight 8.7 pounds, range effective 656 yards, maximum effective range of 1200 yards, rounds per minute 15. After the long life of the 1903 Springfield, the US Army adopted the M1 Garand in 1936. The M1 was the first general-issue semi-automatic rifle in the world. Finally, the US Army was at forefront technology in the theatre of war. Replacing the 03 Springfield, the M1 Garand was called the greatest battle implement ever devised by General George S. Patton. Unfortunately, the 03 and the M1 served alongside each other for many years as the federal armories in the US were having issues making enough M1s. The M1 was loaded with an 8-round N-block clip. The clip pops out with a distinctive ping when empty. Another can be quickly inserted. The M1 saw service in World War II, Korea, and to a limited extent in Vietnam. When loading the M1 Garand, you had to be careful, as if you were a bit too hasty, you could end up with what they called Garand thumb, which was where when you pushed the clip in, the top cover would slide back and squash your thumb before you could remove it. M14 rifle, 9.8 pounds empty, 11.5 pounds loaded, range effective 500 yards, maximum range over 875 yards, rounds per minute was 700 to 750. Starting in the 1970s, the M14 rifle became the standard issue rifle in the US Army. It's based on the M1 rifle, but with a variety of improvements. First, they experimented with the M1, adding fully automatic capability, meaning holding down the trigger releases round after round, rather than one per trigger pull. They also experimented with different barrel lengths, cartridge calibers, and magazine sizes. The final version was more versatile and more powerful than the M1, but was not as well received during the conflicts in the middle 20th century. The woodstock had a tendency to swell in humid environments, like Vietnam and Laos. Plus, the increased weight and longer barrel made it unwieldy for jungle fighting, while the automatic firing was basically uncontrollable. The M14 was used through the Vietnam conflict and late into the 1990s. The M16 rifle, 7 pounds empty, 8.8 pounds loaded. Maximum range 600 yards. Maximum effective range 880 yards. Rounds per minute was 12 to 15 rounds a minute sustained, or 45 to 60 rounds a minute semi-automatic, or 700 to 950 rounds with full automatic. Based upon the Armalite's AR-15 rifle, the M16 is made of steel, aluminium alloy, and polymer plastics, and is much lighter than any previous US Army rifle. The M16 was approved for use by the military in 1963, and was standardised and adopted in 1967, meaning it served alongside the M14 and in some cases the M1. The M16 has a detachable magazine and can be fired as a semi-automatic or automatic rifle, much like the M14 before it. The best feature of the M16 is its overwhelming versatility. The weapon, with a variety of sizes and configurations, can be tailored to fit different needs on the battlefield. For example, the non-wood stock would never swell in humidity, and a shorter carbine version could be issued as the terrain requires. It can also accept attachments such as grenade launchers, bayonets, lights and advanced optics. The M16 began use in the late 60s and continues to be used around the world today. I hope you now have a better understanding of the rifles that helped to create and define the US. Do you have a particular favourite? Leave a comment down below with yours. Personally, I've always had a soft spot for the M14. Don't really know why, I've never fired it, but I just like the look and the sound. As always, leave a like if you enjoyed it, share it amongst your friends, and of course subscribe for future content. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, stay safe, and see you in the next video. Goodbye.